Hi, hi, and welcome to Read With Me series. And we are going to do the Data Protection Act of 2019. So, let me take you through the act. First, let me give you a background so you may understand. Data protection in Kenya is like up until 2019, there was no legal framework to regulate data usage. There was no legal framework to establish how an entity, public authority, or a financial institution was going to use your data when you like open an account with them. In the case of a bank, you enter your personal details, your profile, your PIN, everything. How are they going to dispose of this data? Can they sell it to companies for marketing purposes or advertising? Can they uh, dispose of it once they have used it? Like, there was nothing that regulated this or managed the use of data by any institution. And this meant that anybody, including banks, could set policies that would favor them, maybe waive your personal privacy rights to the use of your data. This meant that you could receive promotional messages which you did not even want. This meant that you could have your information be handed over and to some organization that is hunting for personal data. It could be used in elections to register you for as if you voted for someone which you did not. It could be misappropriated, it could be misdirected, misused, abused, sold for profit, anything really. So the Data Protection Act was triggered by a petition, okay? A petition about Huduma number. There was a time in Kenya very recently where people, the public or the state suddenly required that everybody should register for this thing called Huduma number. And upon registration, you are required to put down all your details. You would fill this huge form with multiple questions about your personal life, your family, whether you are married or not, whether you had any bank account, your passport number, your KRA pin, everything. It would ask for everything. And this really raised uh, a very dangerous scenario, where if you could trust your personal data of such magnitude to give to someone, the state, for example, in this case, how sure are you that that data is protected? That was the question. And even well, this petition, Huduma number petition, challenged the the Huduma number registration. Uh, Everyone was concerned that we were already told by the state to. It's like they forced us to register, not really like forcefully, but they like told us to think that one day we would not have access to education, traveling, jobs, or anything if we hadn't registered for this Sodoma number. So issues on privacy, issues on data protection, personal data protection arose during this time, and it was such a discussion back then. So it even is a discussion right now. So the government quickly drafted this Data Protection Act so that it looks like there is in existence a data protection system here in Kenya. So let's go through this and see what it talks about. How does it say data should be used? Who is responsible in case data is misused or sold to third parties? what happens when someone has already used your data for the intended purpose, like a bank or another institution. What do they do when they're disposing of it? How do they do that? We will also look at the office of the data commissioner, which just recently celebrated their 100-day anniversary, so it's a very new office. um, we will see what their mandate is, what it is that this office does. Does it like receive any complaints maybe regarding misuse of personal data? Does it hear any cases? What happens really? So let's look at this, read with me, and let's just internalize this act together. Now, the Data Protection Act, number 24 of 2019. Let's look at the subtopics or topics we will cover under the act. It provides for um, establishment of the office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which I just told you. It's a recent office, like 3 months in or something. So not really, like it was opened. Okay, if they celebrated, yeah, it's like 3 months and 10 days ish. Okay, so then we have establishment of the office of the data commissioner, appointment of the data commissioner, qualifications, functions, powers of the office, delegations, vacancy in the office of the data commissioner, removal of the data commissioner, staff of the office, remuneration of the data commissioner and staff, oath of office, confidentiality agreements, and protection from personal liability. Then part 3 of the Act deals with registration of data controllers and data processors. Now, registration of data controllers, application for registration, duration of the registration certificate, register of data controllers and data processors, cancellation or variation of the certificate, compliance and audit, designation of the data protection officer, and then part 4 on principles and obligations of personal data protection. We have principles of personal data protection, rights of a data subject. So here we'll discuss all the rights and the principles around personal data protection, exercise of rights by the data subject. The data subject is you and me, whoever whose data is being requested, is being asked to be used. That's the data subject. Exercise of rights by the data subject, collection of personal data, duty to notify, lawful processing of personal data, data protection, impact assessment, conditions for consent, processing of personal data relating to a child, restriction on processing, automated individual decision making, objecting to processing, commercial use of data, right to data portability, limitation to retention of personal data, right of rectification and erasure, data protection by design or default, particulars of determining organizational measures, notification and communication of breach. Then part 5, we will look at grounds for processing of sensitive personal data. Now, processing of sensitive personal data, permitted grounds for processing sensitive personal data relating to health, further categories of sensitive personal data. Then part 6, transfer of personal data outside Kenya. Now, section 48, conditions for transfer out of Kenya, safeguards prior to transfer of personal data out of Kenya, personal data relating to health, processing through a data server or center in Kenya. Then we move on to part 7, where we discuss exemptions. Now, section 51 to 55, general exemptions, journalism, literature and art, research, history and statistics, exemptions by the data commissioner, data sharing code. Then part 8, We look at enforcement provisions. We look at complaints to the data commissioner, investigation of complaints, enforcement notices, okay? Power to seek assistance, power of entry and search, obstruction of the data commissioner, penalty notices, administrative fines, right of appeal, compensation of data subject, preservation order. Then we move on to financial provisions under Part 9, funds of the office, annual estimates, accounts and audit, annual report. Part 10, provisions on delegated powers, we have regulations. And then Part 11, the final part, miscellaneous provisions on offenses of unlawful disclosure of personal data, general penalty codes, guidelines and certification, and finally consequential amendments. So here we basically see so many things have been, the act has tried to highlight so many important things, yeah, and that's like a good thing. I hope it's really good, because if we can have a place to put down our whatever we call them, the complaints for breach of or misuse of personal data, that's good for us, right? So moving on, let's start. So the first thing that the act says is, this is an act of parliament to give effect to article 31C and D of the constitution, to establish the office of the data protection commissioner, to make provision for the regulation of the processing of personal data, to provide for the rights of data subjects and obligations of data controllers and processors, and for connected purposes. Now you know me. Whenever an article is quoted in any act that I read in my Read With Me series, I want to see where it is, what it talks about, because everything comes from our supreme law, which is the Constitution of Kenya. Now, Article 31 say, um, it talks about the right to privacy. Every person has the right to privacy, which includes the right not to have their which includes the right not to have their person, home, or property searched, their possessions seized, okay? Information relating to their family or private affairs unnecessarily acquired or revealed, okay? Unnecessarily required and revealed, okay? Or the privacy of their communications infringed. So this article 31 C and D is about information relating to someone's family or their private affairs, okay, unnecessarily required or revealed, and the privacy of their communications as well. So this is basically an act which is going to revolve around protecting the right to privacy as far as information about your personal life, personal information about your family, yourself, your profile, okay, unnecessarily required or revealed, all right? So it's very important that you look at this foundation and in the constitution. Okay, moving on. So under interpretation, the act has some terms that it has attempted to explain. So, under this act, anonymization means the removal of personal identifiers from personal data so that the data subject is no longer identifiable. I think it comes from the word anonymous, okay? Now, biometric data means personal data resulting from specific technical processing based on physical, physiological, or behavioral characterization, including blood typing, fingerprinting, deoxyribonucleic acid analysis, earlobe geometry, retinal scanning, and voice recognition. Okay, so biometric data is personal data resulting from all these things I have mentioned. Okay, The one I'm familiar with is fingerprint and voice recognition. Like the Safaricom, at some point, Safaricom required that you register for your voice so they can recognize it for any services to increase their security. Okay. We don't know where that voice is going to be used, how it's going to be disposed of. Okay, once someone that no longer wants to subscribe to Safaricom, maybe they change their phone or SIM provider. Then also we have fingerprinting, where you go to a bank and you are required, if you want to withdraw anything, to input your fingerprints. Or when you are like attending class, the or getting into a university building, you are required to like put your fingerprints. Okay, you don't know where that information is going to be used. All right, you don't know, once you're out of the school, how the fingerprint is going to be disposed of. Is it going to be sold to another party? Will you suddenly one day find your fingerprint in the DCI, Director of Criminal Investigations, where now you've been connected to a crime of some kind? You just don't know. So moving on, cabinet secretary, we have means the cabinet secretary responsible for matters relating to information, communication, and technology. Okay, so this is the waziri for the ministry or wizara of information, communication, and technology. Consent means any manifestation of express, unequivocal, free, specific, and informed indication of the data subject's wishes by a statement or by a clear affirmative action, signifying agreement to the processing of personal data relating to the data subject. I take it this means that the act requires consent to process your personal data, and makes the same requirement for any institution, public authority, or financial institution like a bank, to obtain consent for your for the use of your data. Okay, for the processing of your data, maybe to send you updates, to send you promotions, to send you technical difficulties messages and such stuff. So data, now data means information which is processed by means of equipment operating automatically in response to instructions given for that purpose. So data is simply information. Just know that this information is processed by means of equipment like a computer, for example. All right. Is recorded with intention that it should be processed by means of that equipment. So the data is not only processed using equipment such as computers, it's or apps or anything really. It also is recorded, so it's permanent, like it's there. It can be seen, it can be accessed, it can be reproduced, it can be all those things. Is recorded as part of a relevant filing system where it does not fall under paragraph A, B, C, forms part of an accessible record. So like I said, it's a record, it's there, it's accessible, you can reproduce it, you can share it, you can do whatever. Is recorded information which is held by a public entity and does not fall within any. So even your personal information which the government has, like information to do with your national ID, your number, your face, your facial, recognition, your fingerprints, because as you register for any identification in Kenya, you must put your 10 fingers in. So imagine someone has access to your unique God-given fingerprints and you want to make sure it is at least safe, that someone cannot access that information to frame you for a crime you did not commit, or to steal your identity or something. I don't know. So all these things, we move on. Who is the data commissioner? It's the person appointed under section 6. So we'll see Who is a data controller? It means a natural or legal person, public body, agency, or other body which alone or jointly with others determines the purpose, okay, and means of processing of personal data. I would take it these data controllers would be in the case of public authority like the state or any of those departments like the immigration department, we have a natural or legal person. A legal person can be a corporate body, okay, a corporate body, okay, where we have like companies or we have banks, agency or other body which jointly or in connection with others determines the purpose for that data, what's going to be used for, and the means of processing it. Okay, that's personal data. Your name, your date of birth, your what. Data processor is a person, legal or natural, public body, agency, or other body which processes personal data on behalf of the data controller. So the data controller is like the big boss who determines the purpose the personal data will be used for and the means it will be processed, and then hires the services or brings on board the data processor who now processes the personal data on behalf of the personal of sorry on behalf of the data controller. So data subject means you and me, an identified or identifiable natural person who is subject of personal data, okay. Encryption means the process of converting the content of any readable data using technical means into coded form. Now, this encryption can be the Morse code, for example, tap 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 tap, or it can be, that's what I know, I'm giving you examples I know. It can also be like in WhatsApp, where now it has, sometimes in WhatsApp you see this pop-up message which says that your the communication between you and someone, the messages going back and forth have now been encrypted, meaning that whichever third party that tries to download or reproduce them, it will not be seen as like the same text, like the universe provides me with everything I need. It will be read like maybe XXX dash 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 something something QYZ. So all this is like what I know of this encryption. The filing system means any structured set of personal data which is readily accessible by reference to a data subject or according to specific criteria, whether centralized, decentralized, or dispersed on a functional or geographical basis. So I take this filing system as to mean, for example, when you lose your identification card and you go to Huduma Center of any county, okay, the first thing you'll be asked, what is your name? As if you want a replacement of your ID, you'll be asked what is your name as it appears on the ID. You will give the person your name. The person simply just taps in your name, and then he has access to the your ID as it looks and your identification number, and reproduces it basically using a printer. Okay, so the thing is this, where does this person get that data? Okay, where is the data stored? It is stored in the filing system where anyone can whoever is authorized, in this case of the immigration and Huduma Center, they can access. Okay, so moving on, health data means data related to the state of physical or mental health of the data subject and includes records regarding the past, present, or future state of the health, data collected in the course of registration for or provision of health services, or data which associates the data subject to the provision of specific health services. So what we understand here is that wherever someone registers for maybe health insurance, they are connected to a certain hospital, the details have been stored, whether they visit the hospital and register and they get their registration card, their details are stored, the files that are kept in the hospital for each patient who comes in, their prognosis, their diagnosis, their prescriptions, everything. So this is health data. Their scans, CT scans, a record of their, their progress or whatever it is. Now, identifiable natural person means a person who can be identified directly or indirectly by reference to an identifier such as a name, an identification number, location data, an online identifier, or to one or more factors specific to the physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity. So an unidentifiable natural person is simply a person who can be identified by reference to a name, like an ID number, location, an online identifier, or one or more of the physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, or other identities. Okay, so I think data subject and identifiable natural person, uh, I don't know the difference, but it seems to me they are similar. Okay, now moving on, national security organs, we have the meaning under article 239. So national security organs 239, these include the Kenya Defence Forces, the National Intelligence Service, okay, the National Police Service, okay, those three, okay, those are the national security, the police, the defense, and the intelligence service. So moving on, we have the office. Office means the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, the new office I told you about, which has just celebrated their 100-day anniversary. Then we have the personal, we have person has the meaning assigned to an Article 260 of the Constitution. Like, I know what a person is, but let's just say for the purposes of, for the sake of it, okay. Mm-hmm. Mm. Oh my God, where is 260? Oh, so a person has been identified. 260 is like the interpretation section of the Constitution, and it's like in the final pages. It's put like the last. So we have a person is being identified as mm, includes a company, okay, association, or other body of persons, whether incorporated or unincorporated. So a person is not just the natural person, it's also the artificial person, okay. Now, moving on, personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. So now I get it. An identifiable natural person is a human person who can be identified by a name, location, religion, culture, genetics, all these factors. All right. So when you hear identifiable, natural person is the human person who has a God-given name, and all these things are like a life, an existence. So moving on, personal data breach means a breach of security leading to the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, okay, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of or access to personal data transmitted, stored, or otherwise processed. All right. Now you can imagine, like Facebook, you have your data there, okay, and a company steals the data from Facebook, for example. All your personal profile, your it will show your location, because you will tag, obviously, when you are posting, oh, I am here, I am there. So your location, your name, even if you won't use like your real name, but I'm sure at some point Facebook will require some form of identity, like a phone number, for example, excuse me, or an email address, all right, or something, your date of birth, or something, and once it requires that, the data is can be just, even if Facebook prohibits the selling of its data, what happens when someone hacks, for example, Facebook, and takes and goes away with everything, and uses that data to register you to maybe an association you've never heard of that association before, or something. Yeah, it's possible and it has happened. So we have the data breach is simply where any of these people, institutions, use, abuse, disclose your data to another third party, sells it for profit, transmit it, okay, uh, changes or destroys it unlawfully, okay, or accidentally, okay, or accesses your personal data without your consent, for example. So moving on, processing means any operation or set of operations which are performed on personal data, or Jesus, what's wrong with me? Or on sets of personal data, whether or not by automated means. So processing is simply the, what do you call it, the geeky stuff of doing these things, like of translating data into, or putting it, digesting it into a computer. I don't know, okay, I'm not a technical person. So, and this is the ways it can be processed, okay. um So we have collection, and let me tell you, this processing has been specified not only to mean using automated computer systems. It can also be uh, or it can also not be by any automated system, such as collecting your personal data, recording it, organizing it, structuring it, storing or adapting it, or changing it, retrieving, consulting, or using it, okay, disclosing it through sharing or to another person or entity, or making it available maybe on a platform somewhere so some people can access it. Alignment, alignment or combination, restriction, erasure, or destruction of the data. So I something came to mind. I just thought of a phone book, okay, where you have the phone with the name of the person and the address and their number on widely available at any phone booth, maybe not the kind I've seen before when phone booths used to exist. I was very small, obviously, but I remember there was this huge yellowish kind book with names and addresses and numbers. And also in movies, old movies, like you can see somebody just flips it if they are looking for someone's number to call them. So my mind is asking me like, is is that really, like, is it data breach? Can it be considered that your data is widely available, accessible, it's recorded, it's collected, it's organized according to your street address, it's stored on a book, it can be accessed, it can be disclosed to anybody, so you can get a phone call by telecommunicators, telemarketers, all those people who are advertising stuff. Why should your home phone ring and just anyone can call it, including robbers, stalkers, anyone really, con artists, scammers? We should ask ourselves why should such a book exist where someone can know your phone number and where you live and your name. It's really not safe according to me. Anyways, so profiling means any form of automated processing of personal data consisting of the use of personal data to evaluate certain personal aspects relating to a natural person. Okay, so it means any form of automated processing of personal data consisting of the use of personal data to evaluate certain personal aspects relating to a natural person. For example, like when you are registering for the Huduma number I told you about, that the information that was being asked was profiling you, like marital status, sex, your education level. It has so many things. I remember that form was very lengthy, and your passport number. It wanted everything about you in just one tiny booklet. Okay, everything. So that information where you are asked personal data regarding so many areas of your life, it's called profiling, like sex, race, marital status, health, ethnic, social origin, color, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, okay, belief, mm, culture, dress, language, personal preference, interest, behavior, location, or movement. Okay, so another thing comes to mind: your personal curriculum vitae or CV. While you are looking for a job, you fill in, you apply to hundreds of organizations or institutions, and how do they dispose of your CVs? Because CVs contain everything about you, including your ID, your sex, your location, your preferences, your hobbies, your education level, where you got your education, all that information. How do the organizations or institutions dispose of those CVs? For example, if they once they have selected the people they want for the job, and deselected others, like did not choose others, so well, how do they dispose of them? Because if they like put them somewhere, do they keep them? Do they sell the data? Do they burn them? Do they shred? Okay, or do they simply uh, just cut and throw into a dustbin so any person can access your data and go through? I don't know. Do they leave them just haywire in the office such that any staff member can peruse through and see your name, your phone, your everything about you? Like serious, these are, they may seem like very small matters, but they really are not. Okay. I remember while I was working at this place, People will, the coordinator advertise for like a job, and the organization advertise for as like not a job really, but uh, like a research, a 1 week research kind of vacancy, where we looked for interns to help with that, or research assistant. So it wasn't a job per se, but it required those applicants to apply with their CV and personal information. So until I left the place, those things were just on a shelf and anyone could have access to them. Yeah. So that my question is, those people don't know that their CVs are just there. Okay, maybe the organizations should just call them back and tell them to take them back, because anyone can use that CV to call that person, to establish a relationship, to con them, to scam them, to, if a malicious person exists somewhere, they can sell the data, they can share it. Okay, they can start stalking that person who applied innocently for that position. They can, all these things they can result. So data is a big thing. Let's not underestimate this thing. Okay, so we have something called pseudonymization. I don't know what this means. The processing of personal data in such a manner that it can no longer be attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information. Okay, and such additional information is kept separately and is subject to technical and organizational measures to ensure that the personal data is not attributed to an identified or identifiable natural person. Okay, so I think this is like a safe way of processing personal data, that you can't trace it back to someone unless you use additional information which is kept separately. Okay, and it is subject to technical measures to ensure that it's not attributed to an identity. So I guess this is like a safe mechanism for storing personal data, where you, if you want to trace it back to somebody, you need additional access, like you need like a code, or to access more information. You can't trace it back to someone. So so let me just look back. I think I saw something called anonymization, which means the removal of personal identifiers. So this, I think, are safe measures that this act is going to use or prescribe for maybe personal data, where the identifiers are removed so that is no longer identifiable. Okay, these are really two ways I have seen here in this act, which are like proposing safe storage or processing of data which cannot be traced back to the person. So register means the register kept and maintained by the data commissioner under section 21. Then we have restriction of processing, means the marking of stored personal data with the aim of limiting their processing in the future. So this is also another way of limiting access to personal data, by restricting it. Okay, marking it, so you can limit access, limit processing, limit accessing. Okay, another way we have the sensitive personal data. Another term means data revealing the natural person's race, health status, ethnic, social origin, conscience, belief, genetic, data, biometric, data, fingerprint, property details, marital status, family, including names of children, parents, spouses, sex, sexual orientation. So this is normally data that was collected during the Huduma number registration. That is why everybody was like putting question marks around it. And so you can consider this data that is normally used during registration of identification cards, while acquiring your passport in the Department of Immigration, all these things. This is sensitive personal data. Okay, this data now, unfortunately, is even asked for in banks, but you won't, of course they won't tell you give us your genetic data or beliefs. Are you Muslim? No. Or are you Christian? No. They will just ask something close to it, but it's still sensitive. They could ask maybe if you are married, and who is your beneficiary, maybe in case of anything, you know, your next of kin or something. They could ask for your income, your occupation, what do you work as, okay, your sex, okay. So sensitive data is basically data we give during identification, registration, huduma number, data we give through even those sensors, population sensors that take place, okay. All this is very sensitive information. In fact, I remember during population census, people would, some strangers would come with their identification badges, knock on your door, and you open the door and you welcome in, because you can't like refuse not to let them in, and there's normally a police officer who accompanies them, okay. So they come in, so in the presence of the police, whatever you are asked you say. So they ask you, how many do you use, like gas to cook, or are you poor, like you use charcoal, or it's like, okay, I'm not saying are you poor, but it's like they're implying that what is your economic status. Are you low class? Are you middle? Are you high? They of course look at the houses they enter, but they don't go to every room. I'm sure they don't, but they can see from the where you tell them to sit, obviously, that yes, maybe this person is this. So they have this tab and they record all this information you give them. Do you own land? Do your parents own land? You know, that is very sensitive information. Where are your parents? Like this, you have sisters, you have any siblings? So that is very sensitive. So this one I almost forgot it, but thankfully I remember this. The population census is also sensitive information, sensitive personal data, and God knows what that data is being used for after it has already been, after it has already satisfied the intended use, which is to see the population, how the increase or decrease, or expectancy, and all those things that are important. What then after that? How does the government dispose? How did it dispose all that data from beginning of time, where population census began, until this point? Moving on, so we have third party. A third party means a natural or legal person, public authority, agency, or other body other than the data subject, okay? Data controller, data processor, or persons who, under the direct authority of the data controller or data processor, are authorized to process personal data. So a third party is a natural or legal person, public authority, agency, or other body other than the data subject, okay? Data controller, data processor. So third party is everyone who is not you, who has access to your data to process, to organize, to store, to record. So everyone who is not you is a third party, okay? Now let's now move on into the substantive part of the Act, Section 3. We are done with the interpretation. Now Section 3 starts like this. It talks about objects and purpose of this Act. So what is this Act intended to do? The object and purpose is to do the following: to regulate the processing of personal data. So this Act came into force to regulate the processing of personal data. It is also to ensure that processing of personal data of a data subject is guided by the principles set out in Section 25, which we will see. So it's not only to regulate the processing, but to give the principles that should be abided by while someone is processing. So to protect the privacy of individuals, like we said under Article 31 of the Constitution, to establish the legal and institutional mechanism to protect personal data. So we have to establishment of the legal and institutional. See, I told you before this act, when I was doing my introduction, that this act, before this act, there did not exist any legal framework, regulatory framework for data protection in Kenya. So this act is attempting to cover that gap, like to fill that gap by establishing the legal and institutional mechanism to protect personal data, okay? And then the final object is to provide data subjects with rights and remedies to protect their personal data from processing that is not in accordance with this act. So any processing that is not going to follow the principles under this act will be considered unlawful and will entitle the data subject to remedies, okay? To remedies and to rights as well. Right not to have your data unlawfully processed, all right? So section 4 is application. Now this act applies to the processing of personal data entered in a record, okay, by or for a data controller or processor by making use of automated or non-automated means. So this act will so far apply to data, personal data, the processing of which can be done either by computer systems or automated, or it can be done through manual systems, through pen and paper, or through, non-automated, just where you input the person's details. Then we move on, provided that when the recorded personal data is processed by non-automated means, it forms a whole or part of a filing system. So this is like it puts an exception here. It says that provided that when the recorded personal data is processed by, let's say, pen and paper, it forms a whole or part of a filing system. So it should go to a place somewhere where it can be accessed, later transmitted, it can be reproduced, it can be shown, that it exists. That is what a filing system we said was, okay? So number two, it also applies, this act applies to the processing of personal data by a data controller or data processor, okay? So who is established or resident in Kenya and processes personal data while in Kenya. And then the second one is not established or ordinarily resident but processing personal data of subjects located in Kenya. So this has that foreign element of responsibility or liability even on the part of a foreign maybe company like Facebook, a foreign like organization, or financial institution like PayPal, for example, PayPal, like let's say World Remit, or some other foreign person or company who is not in Kenya, who is not Kenyan, not in any way affiliated to Kenya, but processes your personal data uh, as a you as a resident or a Kenyan, you have input your personal data maybe in like in my case PayPal when I was registering, also like in another case World Remit also I imported. Then where else? Facebook. I'm using Facebook, Instagram. All those social media platforms are not created by Kenyans. They are not controlled. The servers are not here in Kenya, but somewhere else, and we have inputted all our information inside there. We have what else? Yeah, you can just have your own examples to make sense of this. So thank God for that, because at least this acknowledges that it's not always that data, your personal data, will be circulating within the country, especially now with internet and social media and advances in financial industry. We can do so many things and have so many things happening all over the world, and you live in Kenya, but your presence or your details can be captured even in Europe, can be captured even in Americas, in UK, everywhere across the world. So moving on, we have part 2, which talks about establishment of the Office of Data Protection Commissioner. All right, so this office is established, okay, which is a body corporate, okay. The office is a body corporate with perpetual succession and a common seal, and shall in its corporate name be capable of, okay, suing and being sued. So it's like a company, an institution. So it can be sued, it can sue, it can take, purchase, all those elements of legal personality are here, such as perpetuity, ability to sue and be sued in the office name, purchasing things in the name of the office, uh, uh, um, entering into contract in the name of the office, doing such other legal acts for the proper functions of the office. Now, the office is designated as a state office in accordance with Article 260 of the Constitution. So let's look at state office. So state office means any of the following offices. Number one, the president, the office of the president, office of the deputy president, office of the cabinet secretary, office of the member of parliament, office of judges and magistrates, office of member of a commission, like in this case, the commissioner uh, is belongs to this commission. I don't know, let's just say holder of an independent office, member of a county assembly, the governor, the deputy governor, or the CEC, like the county executive members, of Attorney General, Director of Public Prosecution, Secretary to the Cabinet, Principal Secretary, Chief of the Kenya Defence Forces, Commander of a service in the Kenya Defence Forces, okay? So, Director General of the National Intelligence Service, Inspector General and Deputy Inspectors, okay? of the National Police Service, an office established and designated as a state office by national legislation. So here in this act is a national is a piece of legislation, and in this act it establishes the office, so it becomes the state office under Article 260 of the Constitution. Yeah. So yeah, so we move on now. So the office shall comprise the data commissioner as its head and accounting officer and other staff. The office shall ensure reasonable access to services. The data commissioner shall, in consultation with the cabinet secretary, establish such directorates as may be necessary for the carrying out of functions. So, Section 6, appointment of the data commissioner, the Public Service Commission, okay? The Public Service Commission, whenever a vacancy arises in the position of the data commissioner, will initiate the recruitment process. So the public service will also, within 7 days of being notified of a vacancy, invite applications from persons who qualify for nomination and appointment to the position. The Public Service Commission, okay? The Public Service Commission will where am I? Yeah, shall, within 21 days of receipt of applications, will consider the applications received, will shortlist qualified applicants, will publish and publicize the names of the applicants, the shortlisted ones, will conduct interviews, will nominate 3 qualified applicants in order of merit. Now, then they will submit the names nominated to the president. Now it's the president who has the final say, who, with approval of National Assembly, will appoint the data commissioner. So the public service is an agent of the state who will carry out the whole interview process and shortlist them, pick 3 out of the shortlisted, send the names to the president nominates one, okay? Now, qualification of data commissioner. So, so that just a little bit here, I want to clarify. When the president appoints someone, when you are working in a position where appointment is by the president, then know that you are a state officer, okay? You are a state officer under the Constitution, and you are entitled to certain rights and privileges. So, Section 7, qualifications of data commissioner. A person shall be qualified for appointment as the data commissioner if that person does the following things. It holds a degree from a university recognized in Kenya in the following fields: in the field of data science, okay, in the field of law, in information technology, or any other related field. Also, that person needs to have knowledge and relevant experience of not less than 10 years. So, in whatever field your expertise is, you need to have gathered at least 10 years of experience. You need to meet the requirements of Chapter 6 of the Constitution. Chapter 6 of the Constitution. I think, let me see. Chapter 6. Let me see what it's all about. Chapter 6 is on leadership and integrity, responsibilities of leadership, okay? Oath of office of state officers. I told you, once you are a data commissioner, if any position requires the final appointment by the president, then you are not just a regular employee, but you fall under this category in the Constitution under Chapter 6 of a state officer who is holding a state office and must subscribe to the conduct, okay, of according to this chapter in the Constitution. You must have integrity. You must not have had a criminal record, all these things. You must be a citizen, you are restricted, okay? You have to conform to ethics and code of conduct. So just to know that the higher the position, the higher the burden. So meet the okay. So we have so the data commissioner also, she needed to have a master's degree. I say she because the one we have is we have a female data commissioner. So she needs to hold like a master's degree, conform to the code of conduct and ethics in chapter 6, and have hold a degree in any of these fields, and has to have had 10 years at least of experience. Now, Section 8, Functions of the Office. Now, the office shall do the following things: shall oversee the implementation of and be responsible for the enforcement of this act. So, what the office does is to implement this act. Okay? It's okay that the act exists, but it needs to be put to the application, it needs to be enforced. And number 2, establish and maintain a register of data controllers and data processors. So this is a very important function. This office, or the data commissioner, she will maintain a register of data controllers in Kenya and data processors. I wish I could see maybe how this register looks like, and who are the main ones. Like I know the state is one of them. Like the state is one of the data controllers. Okay, I know that financial institutions are, but I wish I knew like how the register looks like, and just get examples of people who could fall in that register, okay, who could be there. Who are these people who hold privilege to process data, our own data? So now function 3, the office will exercise oversight on data processing operations, either of on motion or at the request of me and you. So we can request the data commissioner to oversee some data processing operation and verify whether it is being done lawfully in accordance with the Act. Function 4, promote self-regulation among data controllers and data processors. So it will promote self-regulation among data controllers and data processors. So it will maybe set out principles or rules for every data controller or processor to abide by while doing while processing data. If it won't provide these rules, it will require that every data controller has a policy for data use or data storage or processing. Okay, so it will like make a requirement for every financial institution or the public department to have their own data protection policy on privacy of the personal data of people that they, or clients or customers that they collect from. So it will conduct an assessment on its own initiative of a public or private body. So it will assess by itself, okay? It will assess by itself any public or private body, okay? Um, mhm. Or at the request of someone, me and you, or a public body, okay, it will, to make sure or to ascertain whether information is being processed lawfully, all right, in accordance with this. So the good thing about the functions of the data commissioner under these sections is that the functions have been like the data commissioner is getting on the ground. I don't know what to call it. The data commissioner has been given, not the data commissioner, the persons, me and you, the data subjects, have access to this office, okay, to make their, to ask, to make requests for checkups, okay, of these data controllers or processors, to make sure they are not unlawfully disposing of this data, okay. So it can conduct assessment as well, and that is really good because it means at least now people have someone or an office to go to in case they are suspicious about their data being misused or being processed without permission or other things, okay. So they will also receive complaints, and this is also very good to receive a complaint. So if you are aggrieved, you can have somewhere to go to. You will go to the office of the data commissioner and receive, and they will receive your and investigate your complaint by any complainant, okay. So it will be investigate any type of complaint by any person on infringement of these rights, okay. And this is very good. At least yani it's good because it does not limit the complaint process. It doesn't say that only if you have complaints submit them to a certain public authority who will then come to me. No, it's open. It's like the office of the ombudsman, open. Just come, I will receive, and I will investigate, all right. And this is the best, like the beauty of this function of this office. mm, so uh, take such measures as may be necessary to bring the provisions of this act to the knowledge of the general public. So it is also this office that will be responsible for creating awareness around this new law, because as I said, it's a recent legislation and people need to be aware of it. So it will create awareness. It will also carry out inspections of public and private entities with a view to evaluate the processing of personal data. So this is really good. The fact that it will carry out inspections of any public, okay, public or private entities, which is really good, to assess the processing, yeah, to evaluate, and in case maybe make recommendations. Now, promote it will also promote international cooperation in matters relating to data protection, okay. It's going to promote the international cooperation in matters relating, and this is, they have already begun to do this, because just in the news the other day, let me check just to be sure, but they were meeting with the ambassador, the data commissioner was meeting with the ambassador, okay, was meeting with the ambassador, was it of the European Union? Let me just check. Data commissioner meeting ambassador. Okay. So I don't know if you can see, but can you really see? Why does it appear like opposite to opposite? Anyway, I couldn't read that. Anyway, so I'm on the website. There's like an active website. It's called Office of the Data. It's odpc.go.ke, which will stand, of course, for O Office, D Data, P Protection, C Commissioner .go.ke, and it has like this statement saying take action and file a complaint, you know. So it's very accessible. Raise a concern or a general inquiry. Then it has this provision of like rights of a data subject, exercising your rights and principles of data protection. Okay, report a data breach. Okay, under data controllers and processors, you have this button saying report a data breach. Okay, general guidelines, data protection statement. Okay, so there's like a memo here. Yeah, there's like a memo. Let me just read it. It says, Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, Nairobi, Friday, June 25th, 2021. Statement on alleged use of personal data and registration to political parties without consent. Yeah, I forgot to mention this. Recently, there have been cases where if you log into your eCitizen account, you find out that you've been registered to a political party and you didn't do that. So that's what I'm saying. Data is a sensitive issue in Kenya at the moment, especially with elections that are coming up, because you find that even with voting, your data could be used to say that you voted for someone which you didn't. So look at this. At least it has come to the attention of the data office of the data commissioner, and she's saying the attention of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner has been drawn to reports of alleged processing, including the collection and use of personal data belonging to members of the public for registration to various political parties without their consent. Imagine. As of 24th of June 2021, the Office of the Data Commissioner had received over 200 complaints from aggrieved individuals who had been registered to various political parties without their consent. Yeah, over 200 complaints from aggrieved people who had been registered to various political parties without their consent. The office has since held a meeting with the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties to establish the status and resolve that the names of the complainants are to be deregistered by the political parties. Okay. My office will continue to engage with the Office of the Registrar of political parties and other data controllers and processors to ensure compliance with the Data Protection Act of 2019. This office notes that the effective implementation of the data protection laws is a key step towards ensuring that Kenya has a robust, thriving, and secure digital economy. To this end, the office of the so blah 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 it continues. So just know that this thing about data in Kenya is a very sensitive issue, and I'm sure it's not just in Kenya, it's all over the world. Okay, if you look at other places where people's data has been compromised, where people there is like a high occurrence of data identity theft, you know, and all other things. It's really crazy. And if the risk in the financial market is even bigger, because this act has not been like in the banks. You find banks have policies that um, banks have policies which waive the right of privacy of its customers. Okay. uh, Also you will see that uh, Okay, I just forgot my train of thought just disappeared into heaven. Let's move on. Yeah, you have the risk. I wanted to say you have the risk where financial institutions can use your data, for example, to take loans on your so you find people taking loans using your name. People take loans in the digital lending world, okay, using your data. Where did they get it from? Because they got it from this unregulated and unsafe processing of your personal data. Maybe one day you called Safaricom customer care. I'm just giving an example, and I don't know their data protection policies, but let's just say someone, there have been cases where Safaricom, if you like, if you visit a Safaricom center and you need any assistance, or you input any of your details, then you get these random calls, okay, that or have people who are pretending to be the Safaricom people, and they ask for your PIN and other details. Then you find suddenly you have a loan of like 200,000 shillings has been taken in your name through the digital lending, the KCB, M-Pesa, or other venues, and it's really crazy. It's like there really needs to be this this data protection. It needs to be really strong, and it should have heavy sanctions, you know. So, what I wanted to see was this fact that we were saying the Office of the Data Commissioner engages with international bodies, and I have it here. We have this, the Data Commissioner is meeting with the ambassadors from um, the EU ambassador to Kenya, European Union, Simon Modu, and head of governance, EU delegation, Alexandre Baron. Okay, so this is really happening on the ground. It's not just something on the act. So promotion of international cooperation in matters relating to data protection and ensure countries' compliance on data protection under international conventions and agreements. So here, this opens up the space of international conventions and agreements to apply, like under Article 2(6) of the Constitution, international law, and any conventions, that Kenya has signed form part of the sources of law in Kenya. So this is good that we can also apply, because even this act has a foreign element to it. It says that even people, data controllers outside Kenya who process this data, it applies to them. So why not also open the space for international cooperation and the international conventions to apply, okay, in this case. Now, undertake research on developments in data processing of personal data and ensure that there is no significant risk or adverse effect of any development on the privacy of individuals. So it will undertake research also on development in data processing to ensure there is no risk. If there is a better way to process data with less risk, it will find that out, okay, to protect the aim is to protect the privacy of individuals. Then the last function is perform such other functions as may be necessary or prescribed by any other law. So subsection 2 says the office of the data commissioner may, in the performance of its functions, collaborate with the national security organs. What are the national security organs? We say they are the Kenya Defence Forces, the Kenya Police, and the National Intelligence Service. So moving on to subsection 3, the data commissioner shall act independently in exercise of its powers. Okay, so this is like, it protects the data commissioner from being unduly influenced by maybe the state departments or the national security departments or organs or anybody really. So, Section 9, powers of the office. The data commissioner shall have power to do the following things. So, it will conduct investigations on own initiative or on the basis of a complaint made by a data subject or third party. So, what is this powers? Yeah, so powers and functions have like overlapped. So conduct investigations on its own or on the basis of a complaint by me and you, obtain professional assistance, okay, consultancy or advice from such persons as considered appropriate, facilitate conciliation, mediation, negotiation on dispute. So this one is saying that ADR will apply to this to solve disputes. ADR is alternative dispute resolution apart from trial. I don't know if they allow a trial to be conducted for the hearing of claims surrounding breach of data. Okay, but let us see, we will learn more. So it's under the powers, we have the power to investigate, the power to get professional assistance. We have the use of ADR, okay, in disputes, issue summons to a witness for the purpose of investigation. So it can issue summons. It can require any person to provide explanation, information, and assistance in writing or in person. It can impose fines, so it can impose fines, okay, for failure to comply with this act. It can undertake any activity necessary to fulfill the functions of the office. It can exercise any powers given to it by any other piece of legislation. The data commissioner may enter into association with other bodies or organizations within and outside Kenya as appropriate in furtherance of the object of this act. Okay, so so um so we already know this, yeah, we already know this. May enter into association with other bodies within and outside Kenya. It's the same that like the international cooperation one, okay? Now, moving on, Article sorry, Section 10, delegation by the Data Commissioner. So the Data Commissioner may, subject to such conditions as it imposes, delegate any power conferred under this Act to an agent, okay? To a regulator established through an act of parliament. So a regulator established through an act of parliament. So the data commissioner can delegate some of its powers to a regulator. I don't know if we have one currently, a regulator of data, but let's just see. Moving on to section 11, vacancy in the office of the data commissioner. The office of the data commissioner shall become vacant if the data commissioner dies, resigns, convicted of an offense, removed from office, okay, because of non-compliance, incompetence, misconduct, all these things, okay. Now, Section 12, removal of the data commissioner. A person desiring the removal of the commissioner on any ground may present a complaint to the Public Service Commission. Remember, it was the Public Service Commission that was the one advertising for this position and recruiting, not really recruiting, but filtering or interviewing and then shortlisting and then giving the names to the president to make the final recruitment. So you if you have any complaint against the data commissioner, the act says you go to the public service commission setting out the alleged facts constituting that ground. Subsection 2, subject to article 47 of the constitution, the public service commission will consider the complaint, and if satisfied that the complaint discloses a ground under section 11D, then will investigate the matter, will report on the facts, will make a recommendation to the cabinet secretary for information. Okay. Prior to any action under subsection, the data commissioner shall be informed in writing of the reasons for the intended removal, offered an opportunity to put a defense. This is just general state office regulations, and state officers, before they are recruited, they are vetted, and before they are done away with, they are given room to explain themselves, to put a defense. So it's just basic courtesy or basic policies under the state officers, okay, or state office under the constitution. So you can, if you are interested, you can look more, but me, I'm not. So let's but I did read for you, okay, everything. So let's move on. Section 13, staff of the office. The data commissioner shall, in consultation with the public service commission, appoint such number of staff as may be necessary for the proper and efficient discharge of the functions under this act or any other relevant law. Okay, so there shall be staff. And who appoints? The data commissioner. Alone? No, in consultation with public service. Okay, so section 14 is remuneration of the data commissioner. Uh, According to the Salaries Remuneration Commission. Okay, oath of office shall take the oath set in the first schedule of on appointment. So there's an oath that the data commissioner takes. Confidentiality agreement. Data commissioner or any staff of the office shall not, unless with lawful authority, disclose any information obtained for the purposes of this act. Okay, so the data commissioner will not be personally liable for having performed any of its functions. Also, it will not, unless with lawful permission, disclose any information. Oh, excuse me. So what this is saying is very simple, that confidentiality, that whatever you complaint you submit to the office, it will not be disclosed to the person against whom you are filing that complaint, which is really important, because if you or me decide we are going to do to conduct any, we are going to follow up or to complain against maybe a public authority or a financial institution against the misuse of our data, we don't want to the person to know exactly that we are the ones who are complaining. I don't know. Is it inevitable in the end that they will know anyway after investigations or during investigations? I don't know, but let's move on. So part 3, registration of data controllers and data processors. Now section 18, registration of data controllers and data processors. Subject to subsection 2, no person shall act as a data controller or data processor unless registered with the data commissioner. Okay, the data commissioner shall prescribe thresholds required for mandatory registration of data controllers and data processors, and in making such determination, the data commissioner shall consider the nature of the industry, the volumes of data processed, whether sensitive personal data is being processed, and any other criteria the data commissioner may specify. Okay, so excuse me, part 3, we say registration. Now, I just wish someone would just tell me examples of data controllers. I know the government could be one, or any public department, and data processors. I just want someone to tell me. Okay. And then my question is, if no person will act as a data controller or processor unless they are registered, what happens to, and this office is just an office that was opened yesterday. So what will happen if to those data processors and controllers, or those institutions which were, you know, qualifying this position before the data commissioner? His office was established by the Act. What will happen? What will happen to them? Are they still going to be required to? I wish the Act would be more forthcoming. Yeah. So while registering them, the data commissioner will look at the following: the nature of industry. Let's say if it's the financial industry, the Central Bank of Kenya, the other banks, the volumes of data processed, the whether sensitive personal data is being processed, and any other conditions. So section 19, application for registration. A data controller or data processor required to register under section 18 shall apply to the data commissioner. Okay. An application under this shall provide the following information. Number one, a description of the personal data to be processed by the data controller or data processor. So there will be like a description of the personal data to be processed by the data controller or processor, which it will say like which type of personal data does it process. Okay. A description of the purpose for which the personal data is to be processed. So they will explain the reason, okay, for processing the personal data. They will also explain the category of data subject to which the personal data relates. Category of people: are they male, women, of which age group, are they children, are they, I don't know, all categories. Does it apply maybe to uh, mm, does it maybe apply to, I don't know, natural persons or corporate bodies? I really don't know. Let's just continue. Contact details of the data controller or data processor. So there will also be contact details that will be required uh, to be indicated there. A general description of the risks. There will be a general description of the risks, safeguards, and security measures, okay, and mechanisms to ensure protection of the personal data. So a general description of the risk and ways to mitigate that risk will be indicated also in the application. Then the application will also contain any measures to indemnify the data subject from unlawful use of data by the data processor. Okay. So it will contain insurance for or security against unlawful data use. Okay. Any other details as may be prescribed by the data commissioner. So this is what the application will contain: a description of the personal data to be used, the purpose for which it is to be used, the category of people who are the targeted, the contact details of the controller, the general description of risks and ways to mitigate the risk, the measures uh, to provide backup for unlawful breach. Okay, now a data controller or data processor who knowingly supplies any false or misleading detail under subsection 1 will commit an offense. Okay, so a data controller or processor who lies on its application form will be committing an offense. The data commissioner shall issue a certificate of registration where it is convinced that the processor or controller meets the requirement for registration. Okay, a data controller or data processor will notify the data commissioner of a change in any particular in the application. Okay, if he wants to change the category of people or the description of the personal data, he will make a, an amendment and he will notify the data commissioner while making that amendment. On receipt of a notification, the data commissioner shall amend. So it's the data commissioner who will amend the entry in the register. Also, a data controller or data processor who fails to comply with the provisions of this section commits an offense. So first we know that there's a register, okay, of data controllers and data processors in Kenya. It's held by this office. Also, when somebody wants to process any data, they must be registered with this office. And when they are registered on application, in the application form, they will describe the personal data, they will describe the purpose it is used for, they will describe the what do you call the target group, okay, category of people. It will have contact details of the data processor. It will describe the risks of data breach and how to mitigate. It will have measures to as backup for the data subject in case of breach of data. And all these are set like a constitution, you see, of an organization, that you can't just change them, you can't lie on them, you have to provide the right information. And if you want to change anything on the particulars you have given in the application, you notify the registrar, and it's not you who's gonna change, it's them who's gonna amend on the register. So the data commissioner here is like the custodian of this information, okay, of the application and the structure of the contained in a data processor or uh, mm, controllers whatever identification. I don't know what to say, but it's just, this office is an office where you, if you submit a complaint against a certain data regulator, maybe let's say the, I don't know, the registrar of like political parties, for example, the data commissioner will simply go to the register and look at the application and look at the criteria followed and whether the offense has gone against what the controller has stated to be the lawful ways it's gonna do or process data. So moving on to section 20, duration of the registration certificate. Okay, a registration certificate issued under section 19 shall be valid for a period determined at the time of the application after taking into account the need for the certificate. Okay, and the holder may apply for a renewal of the certificate after expiry. Okay, so this registration certificate is not like permanent, it is periodic for the time intended to be used, and it can expire, after which you can renew. Okay, so section 21, register of data controllers and data processors. The data commissioner shall keep and maintain a register, I already said, of these controllers, and the data may the commissioner may, at the request of a data controller, remove any entry in the register which it has ceased to be applicable. As I told you, you can amend, the data controllers can amend the data that they submitted in the register by notifying the commissioner. The register shall be a public document and available for inspection by any person. So the register will be public. It's really public. Can I see? I really wanted to see the register shall be a public document. Let me see if it's here. Uh, I want to see if it's here. I want to see examples of the. So all I see in the website is the rights of a data subject to be informed of the use of their personal data, to access their personal data, to object to the processing, to correct false misleading data, to delete false misleading data. Um, mm, so principles of data protection, we are going to look at them. Accurate, adequate, lawfully, right form, okay, not transferred outside Kenya unless there is proof of adequate data protection, safeguards, or consent from the data subject. So, so I'm not seeing the register. I don't know if it's somewhere else. The register of data controllers. I'm not seeing the register. Maybe because the office is new, it has not yet developed one. I don't know. Since the office is new, we cut them some slack, yeah? We don't hold it against anybody. Mm, let me just find examples of data controllers in Kenya. So they include companies, organizations, okay? Mm, mm-hmm. So I'm not seeing so many things, but I'm not seeing like outright examples, but I'm guessing it's any institution, company, organization, public department, like the Register of Lands, Immigration Department, all these people who record, collect personal data, they are going to have to register. I don't know. Will they begin registering? Does the law principle that the law does not apply in retrospect apply to every data controller who has not was formed in the past and this law is just recent? I don't know. Okay, but let's just move on. Let's just move on. So this register, I haven't seen it. It's supposed to be public document and can be inspected by anybody. A person may request the data commissioner for a certified copy of any entry in the register. Okay. Section 22, cancellation or variation of the certificate. The data commissioner may, on issuance of a notice to show cause, vary terms and conditions of the certificate of registration or cancel the registration. Any information by the applicant is false, as I said, where you provide misleading information in the application form, where the holder of the registration fails to comply with the requirements of this act. Now, Section 23, compliance and audit. Okay, the Data Commissioner may carry out periodical audits of the processes and systems of the data controllers or data processors to ensure compliance with this act. Okay. Mm, so there will be periodical audits and systems of the controllers to ensure compliance. Okay. Oh, excuse me, my God, I'm just moving on. Section 24, designation of the data protection officer. Now, a data controller or data processor may designate or appoint a data protection officer on such terms and conditions as the data controller or data processor may determine, where the processing is carried out by a public body or private body, except for courts acting in the judicial capacity, where the core activities of the data controller consist of processing operations, require regular and systematic monitoring of data subjects. So I take it that under Section 24, the a data controller can appoint a data protection officer in public department like the immigration department, where it's like recording and processing of personal data is a regular thing. Okay, it's done every time. So, and it requires systematic monitoring of the data subjects. Okay, it will also um, appoint a data protection officer where processing is carried out by a public department, like I've said, such departments like immigration, or private body, except for courts. So courts, they do not appoint a data protection officer because they're acting in their judicial capacity. Okay, whatever information they are receiving there is likely going to be on the Kenya law reports to be read, okay, by everybody. But I don't know, but they exempted the courts from having the data protection officer. The core activities of the data controller consist of processing of sensitive categories of personal data. So we said sensitive categories was what? Sensitive is data that is used by ID when you're registering, the Huduma number registration, all those population sensors. This is data around everything about you. okay, sex, religion, education, economic status, lifestyle, marital status, everything. So, mhm. Now, subsection 2 says a data protection officer may be a staff member of the data controller or data processor and may fulfill other tasks and duties. Okay, provided that any such tasks and duties do not result in a conflict of interest. So we have somebody who can also be a staff member. So instead of outsourcing the data protection officer, it can be just one of the employees of the concerned public department, okay, in the immigration office, and that person already has another duty, so they'll have like an additional duty of being a data protection officer, okay, but as long as there's no conflict of interest. A group of entities may appoint a single data protection officer provided that he becomes accessible to everybody, okay? Where a data controller or a data processor is a public body, a single data protection officer may be designated for several such public bodies, taking into account the organizational structures. Okay, so a person may be designated or appointed as a data protection officer if that person has relevant academic or professional qualifications, which may include knowledge. Okay, knowledge and technical skills in matters relating to data protection. So we have somebody here who has knowledge and skills in matters related to data protection. They will qualify. Uh, they will qualify. Okay, they will qualify to be a data protection officer. Dun, 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 dun. I'm so sorry. Let me just do something here. There's an important text. So, mm-hmm. Subsection 6 says a data controller can publish the contact details of the data protection officer on their website and communicate them to the data commissioner, who shall ensure that the same information is available. Okay. So I think the measures they have taken is that every data controller should like have a data protection officer. This can be one of the measures the act is proposing, all right, of safeguarding data. Mm, mm, mm. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. So now that we said that a data protection officer is one of those measures the office of the commissioner will take, or even the organizations themselves will take to appoint as one of those measures to safeguard data and promote oversight around the data processing and monitoring of data, personal data of subjects. Now we want to see what what functions this data protection officer um, is going to fulfill. Okay, what functions are they going to fulfill? And these functions are the following: they will advise the data controller and their employees on data processing requirements provided under this act or any other written law. So the functions are to advise um, on the principles and requirements of these acts. Okay, they will also ensure on behalf of the data controller or data processor that this act is complied with. So they will ensure that the act is uh, complied with. Okay, they will ensure compliance. They will also facilitate capacity building of staff involved. So they will conduct capacity building, maybe teach them on the safety of personal data, how to store. Yeah, so I'm sure this data protection officer should at least be trained by the Office of the Data Commissioner on the appropriate ways to conduct this capacity building and provide advice on data protection impact assessment. So they will provide advice on data impact assessment. So there's something called like a data protection impact assessment that is to be done in this organizations. Okay, they will cooperate with the data commissioner and any authorities. So they will cooperate with the commissioner, data commissioner. All right, so we see all these things, they are outlined here as functions. The function of the data protection officer is advisory. Okay, it is one of supervisory as well. They will ensure that the act is complied with. So it is advisory, it is supervisory. Okay, it is capacity building. Okay, all these things. Now, part 6, principles and obligations of personal data protection. Now, principles and obligations of this personal data protection include the following. The personal, data controller or data processor shall ensure the following things are done. Okay, number one, they will ensure that personal data is processed in accordance with the right to privacy of the data subject. So there's a right of privacy under the principles. There's a right to privacy, number one, processed in right to privacy. There's also the principle of lawful, like lawfulness. Can I say that? Like the data should be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent. So there's transparency, okay, and fairness. Then we have the principles of collected for explicit, specified, and legitimate purpose. So there should be legitimate purpose and specified, not just any vagueness like, why are you collecting my data? Or like, don't worry, it will be safe. No, don't worry. Tell me why. Give me the specific purpose. No. So it should be specified and legitimate. Okay, and should not be used in any manner incompatible. Okay, incompatible manner, any way incompatible with with the use. Okay, so it, it should be um, it should be adequate, it should be relevant, it should be limited to what is necessary. So it should be necessary. It should also be relevant to in relation to the purposes for which it is processed. It should be collected only where a valid explanation is provided. Okay, collected only where a valid explanation is provided. So there must be valid explanation, especially according when it is sensitive, okay, especially sensitive data like on family and on private affairs. Then it should also be accurate and updated. So it should be accurate and updated. Okay. So any inaccurate data should be erased or deleted without delay. It should be kept in a form which identifies the data subjects for no longer than is necessary for the purpose which it was collected. So it should be just used for that time period. It should not be kept longer. Okay. Okay. Then should be not transferred outside Kenya. So this is a key principle. It should not be transferred outside Kenya. All right. All right. Now we move on. Section 26, rights of a data subject. So under section 26, the rights of a data subject include the following. A data subject has a right to be informed. Okay. A data subject has a right to be informed of the use. So he must be informed of the use. You should not just come and say, oh, you must give us your details, but it does not specify any use. So he must be informed of the use to which the personal data is to be put. Okay. He must also be He must also have access to their personal data in custody of data controller or data processor. So this person should also have access to it. Okay, should have access to personal data. Okay, he should have the right to object to processing the data. He should have the right to say no, I don't want my data to be collected. Okay. uh to correction of false, he should have the right to correction of false or misleading data. Okay. And then he should also have a right to deletion of false data. Okay. mm-hmm. So we move on. Now the rights are very clear. I don't need to explain, I hope. So section 27, exercise of rights of data subjects. A right conferred on a data subject may be exercised in the following ways. Where the data subject is a child by a person who has parental authority or a guardian. Where the data subject, okay, has mental or other disability by a person. Excuse me, please. Okay, let me drink some water. So, where the data subject is mentally incapacitated by a person who is authorized to act as their guardian or administrator, or in any other case by a person duly authorized by the data subject. So this one is like agency. It introduces the idea of agency. Okay, under section 27, you can act on these rights on someone else's behalf. Now, collection of personal data under section 28. A data controller or data processor shall collect personal data directly from the data subject. Okay. Despite subsection 1, personal data may be collected indirectly. So this section 28 provides like ways in which what do you call ways in which mm, just a minute ways in which a data can be collected. It can be collected in two ways. So you have direct and indirect, collection or processing. Okay. um so the one that is direct is, I think, self-explanatory. The indirect one is the one that is being explained. So personal data may be collected indirectly where the data is contained in a public record. So it is indirect where the data is exists in public record. Okay. Okay. Okay, like where the data on e-citizen exists in the public record, then people have been like the memo of the data commissioner said people have been logging into e-citizen only to find that they have been registered in the political parties. Okay, using their details which are now available in the public record, in the uh, I don't know, is it really a public record, the e-citizen? But I'm just saying that where somebody can use your information which is available in a public record. Okay, it's easily available, and use it for their own unlawful use. Okay, so the data is contained in a public record. The data subject has deliberately made the data public. So where the data subject has has made it public. Okay, has made the data public. The data subject has consented to the collection from another source. So where there is consented to collection. Okay, the data subject has an incapacity. The guardian appointed has consented to the collection, or the guardian has consented. Okay, in the case of incapacity, the guardian has consented. The collection from another source would not prejudice the interest of the data subject. So the collection from another source would not prejudice the interest of the data subject. So prejudice the interests. So collection of data from another source is necessary. So for in the following cases: for the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution and punishment of crime. So where in the case the DPP does investigation, or the police to collect data maybe from Facebook, or your posts on Twitter, or your gallery in your phone to see what you have been watching, or the pictures, and uses it as evidence, that is indirect collection. Okay, for the enforcement of a law which imposes a pecuniary penalty. So this is now this is necessary. So in this case, data is seen as to have been collected indirectly. Okay, for the protection of the interests of the data subject or another person. So subsection 3, a data controller or data processor shall collect, store, or use personal data for a purpose which is lawful, specific, and explicitly defined. So duty to notify. All right. So now I told you the main thing they focused on is not on acquisition of data directly, but acquisition of data indirectly. And I don't know what they are trying to say is, even if you give information public on Facebook, you give your data on Facebook, your pictures, your information, your status, everything, even if you consented to have it made public, um, if the DPP uses it for investigation purposes, like in the case you are accused of a crime or something. So all these are methods that are considered to be indirect acquisition of your personal data. So okay. So let's move on, please. Now, moving on to section 29, duty to notify. A data controller or data processor shall, before collecting personal data, insofar as practicable, inform the data subject of it. So, the duty to notify is important for obvious reasons. So, section 29, duty to notify. Okay. A data controller shall, before collecting personal data, inform the data subject. So he will inform of the rights of data subject under section 26. So he will inform of the right to object, right to those rights we mentioned, right to object, to processing, right to access the information collected, right to all these things in form of rights. Okay. Um, in form of rights, inform the fact that personal data is being collected. You need to know, not just have your personal data collected without your knowledge. So you need to know, it's being collected. You need to know the reason why it is being collected. Okay. You need to also know the third parties whose personal data has been or will be transferred to. Okay. Okay, any third parties that it will be shared to, you need to know. um, you need to know this. Okay, you need to know also the safeguards that will be adopted to protect your data. You need to know the contacts of the data controller, uh, and on whether any other entity may receive the collected personal data. So you need to know the contact information, okay, of the data controller. Contacts of the data controller. I don't know, does this mean contact the people it is cooperating with, or contact the contact information? So you need a description of the technical and security measures to ensure the confidentiality. So you need to ensure to be given like a confidentiality guarantee, okay, that the information will stay confidential, will not be shared. You need to know the data is being collected pursuant to any law, okay, legal basis. Is the collection voluntary? Do you have an option to opt out of the collection? Okay. Do you need to know the consequences if you fail to provide, okay, your information to provide? All right. Now let's move on. 30. Section 33. 0. Processing, lawful processing of personal data. Now section 30 is on lawful processing of personal data. Now a data controller or data processor shall not process personal data unless he does the following things. Number one, the data subject consents to the processing for one or more specified purposes. Okay. So the what do they call them? The data controller or processor shall not process unless the subject agrees to the processing. Okay, this is called lawful. What is considered lawful processing is when you agree to processing of data. All right. So you must give consent. So you must consent. The processing is necessary. The processing must be necessary. Okay. For the following things. Number one, necessary for performance of a contract. So performance of a contract. For example, where the advocate for the seller asks the advocate of the buyer where the money they are going to use to buy the land is going to come from. Like that information is necessary for the performance of the contract of or the agreement to sell the property to you. Okay. So number two, for compliance with any legal obligation to which the controller is subject. So you need to also the processing must also be necessary to comply with any legal obligation. Okay. So necessary to comply with a law. Like for example, where you want to register for an ID card, you must like provide your prove you are a Kenyan citizen. You provide your birth, your certificates, your mother's, your father's, their IDs, and all this stuff. The same with a passport. You get vetted. Okay, if you are a Muslim living in Kenya, if you are a Kenyan Arab, uh, if you are like if you are an Indian, a Kenyan Indian, if you are not like part of the indigenous people living in Kenya, okay, you must be vetted in order to get a passport. Okay, at the immigration, when you are vetted, you are asked all these questions by this panel. You enter a room and there's a panel of people holding files. These files could be your personal files. Okay, I don't know because they held those files and I was trembling and they asked all these questions. So all that uh, is necessary, okay, in order to give you the passport. So in the case of, in order to protect the vital interest of the data subject or another natural person, okay. So in order to protect the interest of the data subject, I don't know. So it's okay for someone to take your data if they're protecting your interest. Hmm? Is it okay? I don't know. Um, for the performance of a task carried out in the public interest. So public interest comes in for the sake of public interest, mm, for the sake of official authority. Okay. Now, in the case of official authority, I think when it comes to census, the census, that the information you give is for the sake of public interest as well, to determine this the economy of Kenya, maybe the population. So all this, I think, this section is basically apart from requiring the consent of the who of the data subject. It also waives the such consent where the data subject does not provide the consent, but still the collector can collect this information, okay, regardless of your consent. So section 30 does not only give the give the requirement of consent, it also takes it away. So it gives and takes away the requirement of consent because it has all these exceptions, okay, which it establishes as necessary, okay, like public interest, to protect your own interests, performance of contract, compliance of law, uh, performance of a task in public interest, uh, public authority. So a task by public authority also. So basically we go back to the same. It's like anything done in the service of public authority, interest, uh, official authority, performance of contract, legal compliance, all those are okay. They can be done without your consent. It's considered lawful. Okay. So I don't know if you want to debate that or not, but that is the case in this case. Okay. So moving on, for the exercise by any person in the public interest of any other functions of a public nature. So it's like anything public does not require your consent. That is really question marks. I don't know. It's okay that the government does require all these things to be done, and it would complicate matters if people said no. I understand, but I don't know, these exceptions are so many. That's all I'm saying. There are so many, and they are giving like a loophole for someone to abuse their their authority and misuse your personal data. Okay. Mm. For the legitimate interest pursued, so we have for the legitimate interest pursued by the data controller or data processor by a third party to whom the data is disclosed, except if the processing is unwarranted in any particular case, having regard to the harm and prejudice to the rights and freedoms of legitimate interest of the data subject. Okay. So, for any reasons legitimate pursued by the data controller or by a third party, except if the processing is unwarranted in any having regard to the harm. Uh, so I don't know. The exceptions are so broad, and they're not supposed to be like that, because someone can just use this section and and you know and just say it was lawful for me. I didn't commit any breach because it was in the public interest, They can say it is for legitimate interest, okay? Like a bank can say it is for a legitimate interest, okay? Mm-hmm. But it is subject to not, it should not be harmful, not harmful to the data subject, okay? And then number 8, for the purpose of historical, statistical, journalistic, literature, and art or scientific research. So, where it is your information or personal data is required for scientific research, it can be taken lawfully without your permission. For scientific, historical, cultural, literature, all that, okay, for these purposes. Okay, so subsection 2 says further processing of personal data shall be in accordance with the purpose of collection. Okay, now further processing of personal data shall be only subjected to the purpose it was collected. So the data that is processed can be further processed if it's for the same purpose. A data controller who contravenes the provisions of subsection 1 commits an offense. So where your consent can be required and it's not given, but the controller takes anyway your data, then they are in contravention. Okay. Now, data protection impact assessment. Under Section 31, we have what we call the data protection impact assessment, where a processing operation is likely to result in high risk to the rights and freedoms of a data subject, okay, by virtue of its nature, scope, context, and purposes of a data controller or a processor shall, prior to the processing, carry out a data protection impact assessment. So, so where there is high risk, okay, the law requires that the data controller conducts a data protection impact assessment. So that is section 31, data protection impact assessment, DPIA. So where there is high risk of high risk to the rights of the data subjects, like rights of privacy and stuff. Uh, a data a data controller will have to do this. Will be required to conduct this impact assessment. Okay. Now, a data protection impact assessment shall include the following things. Number 1, it will include a systematic description of the envisaged processing operations and the purposes of the processing, including, where applicable, the legitimate interest pursued by the data controller or data processor. Mm. So I think it's just basic knowledge. It will have systematic, it will describe the processing operation, the reasons, okay, for the processing. It will describe an assessment of was it necessary to do so. It will say and the relationship between the necessity and the purpose, okay, the processing and the purpose it was intended. Then it will look at the risks and whether it has any mitigations, okay. It will look at the risks to the rights and freedoms. It will assess the measures, it will have the measures and research to address those risks, okay. Subsection 3. The data controller or data processor shall consult the data commissioner prior to the processing if a data protection impact assessment prepared under this section indicates that the processing of the data would result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of our data subjects. Okay, so the data controller or processor will consult the data commissioner prior to processing if a data protection impact prepared under the section indicates that it would have a high risk to the rights. So if there is a high risk, you conduct an impact assessment. If the in the impact assessment you describe the processing, the purpose, the risks, okay, the necessity, the risks, and the measures to mitigate, just like an environmental impact assessment, okay? And then you say where there is a high risk after you've done your impact assessment and you find there's a very high risk to the rights of the person, you just consult with the data commissioner, okay? For the purposes of this section, a data protection assessment means an assessment of the impact the processing will have on the protection of personal data and on the rights and the of the individual and the freedoms, okay? So the report shall be submitted 60 days prior to the processing. So the impact will be submitted 2 months in advance. The data commissioner shall set out guidelines for carrying out this assessment, okay? So it's like an environmental assessment. It will describe DPIA will describe I'm just going through, it will describe the processing, the necessity, okay, the purpose, the risks, and give measures to mitigate, okay? It's that simple, all right? That is the simple method. Uh, mhm, mhm, mhm. So let's move on, please. Section 32, conditions of consent. Now, a data controller shall bear the burden of proof for establishing a data's subject consent to the processing of their personal data. Are we together until then? It is very, very simple. Very simple. The burden of proof on whether a data subject consented to the processing of information or not will fall upon the one who alleges. It's the same. Whoever alleges must prove, so the legal burden of proof will fall on the one who says there was consent provided, okay? Number two, unless otherwise provided, a data subject shall have the right to withdraw the consent at any time. So you can have the right to withdraw consent at any time you wish. Okay. In determining whether consent was freely given, okay, account shall be taken of whether, among others, the performance of a contract, including the provision of a service, is conditional on consent to the processing of personal data that is not necessary for the performance of that contract. Okay. Okay, so let's just move on. So just know that the one who says consent was given will prove, and the simple, the what is it called? The you and I can withdraw the consent anytime. Now, Section 33, processing of personal data relating to a child. So, every data processor shall not process personal data related to a child unless consent is given by the guardian or parent. Processing is in a manner that protects the rights and best interest principle. So the best interest principle of the child rights here applies. You will only process it when it is in the best interest of the child. So a data controller or data processor shall incorporate appropriate mechanisms for age verification and consent in order to process personal data of a child. All right, is this self-explanatory? To me, it is. Mechanisms contemplated under subsection 2 shall be determined on the basis of the following: available technology, volume of personal data, proportion, okay, of personal data, possibility of harm to a child, and such other factors. A data controller or data processor that exclusively provides counseling or child protection services to a child may not be required to obtain. So the child protection services and the counseling, children counseling services will not be required to obtain parental consent. Okay. So I think I will stop here and take a break for like 10 minutes and then I will be back. Okay.